Greetings, noble seekers of history. Welcome to a tale that reverberates across time, a narrative that whispers through the winds of Japan's past, where honor and tragedy intertwine. Today, we will delve into the poignant and heroic journey of Prince Morinaga, a figure whose life was marked by courage, sacrifice, and a heartbreaking struggle for justice in a turbulent era. In a land where power shifted like the seasons, Morinaga stood as a symbol of unwavering loyalty to his father, the emperor, and to the idea of a restored imperial throne. His life was shaped by fierce battles, personal loss, and an unyielding belief in the restoration of his family's honor. But fate, as it often does in the pages of history, proved to be cruel. His tale is one of nobility, resilience, and an untimely demise that shook the very foundations of the empire. As we unravel the chapters of his life filled with both valor and sorrow, we invite you, dear viewers, to reflect on the immense struggles and sacrifices of those who came before us. What resonates with you the most about this tragic hero's story? Do you find the struggles of feudal Japan as compelling and heart-wrenching as we do? Your thoughts and insights are always welcome in the comments below. Share with us how this journey through time makes you feel. Before we continue our journey through these remarkable chapters of history, I have a question for you. One that I believe only you can help me answer. Have you ever wondered what truly defines a hero in a world so full of turmoil? And if you could, would you look at it from a completely new perspective? Your answer could shine a light on a crucial part of the story we're about to unfold. Prince Morinaga, the second son of Emperor Go-Daigo, was born into an era of profound upheaval and uncertainty in Japan. The imperial family, once the unquestioned rulers of the land, had seen their power steadily erode under the relentless grip of the Kamakura shogunate. This was a time when the shogunate had become the true center of power, and the emperor's influence was but a shadow of its former glory. Yet, even in such dark times, a flicker of hope remained for the restoration of imperial rule, personified in the young prince. As Morinaga grew, so too did his understanding of the struggles surrounding him. His heart was steadfast, driven by a deep sense of duty to his family and his nation. He became a symbol of defiance against the forces that sought to keep the imperial family in submission. His unwavering loyalty to his father, Emperor Go-Daigo, and his vision for a restored imperial government made him a beacon of hope for those who believed in the old ways. But Morinaga's path, though noble and filled with acts of heroism, was marred by the tragic realities of political warfare. In a world where loyalty could quickly turn to betrayal, and where power was seized through violence and deceit, Morinaga's fate became intertwined with the brutal political dynamics of the time. His courage, while undoubted, was not enough to shield him from the merciless tides of history. Despite his deep sense of honor and his pivotal role in the fight for imperial restoration, his life would ultimately be defined by sorrow, betrayal, and an untimely demise that forever marked the end of an era. If you find yourself drawn to the incredible stories of bravery, honor, and sacrifice that history has to offer, don't forget to give this video a like. It really helps us share these tales with even more passionate history lovers like you. Share this journey with your friends, family, or anyone who appreciates a good story, and make sure to subscribe so you'll always be the first to experience these captivating narratives. Trust me, we've only just begun our journey through the past. There are countless more thrilling adventures, untold legends, and heroic deeds to uncover. So come along with us as we continue exploring the rich and inspiring stories from history. There's so much more to discover together. Stay with us as we uncover the extraordinary and often heartbreaking journey of Prince Morinaga, a young man whose destiny was forever tied to the fate of Japan itself. Born into a time of political chaos, Morinaga not only fought to restore his family's imperial power, but became a key player in a struggle that would shape the future of an entire nation. In his quest for justice, he faced insurmountable obstacles, showing a courage and determination that inspired many. Yet despite his immense heroism, the cruelty of betrayal struck when he least expected it. As we follow his path, we'll witness the deep sacrifices he made for honor, the loyalty he offered to his father, and the painful cost of navigating the brutal world of feudal Japan's political intrigue. This is a tale not just of a prince, but of a man caught between love-duty and the tragic consequences of a fight for power. His story is a poignant reminder that even the noblest of heroes are sometimes doomed to face a cruel and unforgiving fate. Morinaga was born in 1308, the second son of Emperor Go-Daigo, into a world that seemed to hum with the quiet power of the imperial court. The imperial palace in Kyoto was a place of wealth and intrigue where every glance, every whisper carried weight. Yet even as the baby prince was cradled in his mother's arms, the echoes of the Kamakura shogunate's rule loomed heavy over the empire. "Your Highness," murmured one of the senior courtiers, bowing low before the emperor, "the second prince will carry the weight of your hopes on his shoulders, as all second sons must." Emperor Go-Daigo, a man known for his grand ambitions to restore the power of the imperial family, nodded quietly, though his face betrayed the anxiety that often gripped him. He had placed all his hopes on his first son, Crown Prince Atsuhira, But it was Morinaga who would soon become his greatest asset, or perhaps his greatest sorrow. As a child, Morinaga was marked by both his father's pride and the heavy burdens of expectation. From the earliest age, the courtiers whispered about his sharp mind, his quick learning, and his undeniable strength. He was a child of promise, but also a reminder that the imperial family's grip on power was faltering. "You must learn what it means to lead my son," Godigo would often say to him, his voice full of both pride and a hint of sorrow. "The weight of the throne is heavy, and it is not for those without resolve." Morinaga would often look up at his father, a man who believed so strongly in the restoration of imperial power, and wonder what it truly meant to carry that burden. What would he have to sacrifice? His innocence, his childhood. But the real tests would come soon enough. Prince Morinaga is a fine boy. One of the court advisors said to another, "But he is not the heir. His destiny will be different. His role will be shaped by fate, but not by bloodline." Those words stung. Though Morinaga was born into the imperial family, the second son of the emperor, he was constantly reminded that his future might be defined by the actions of others, not by the title he held at birth. In a court where politics was as much about alliances as it was about blood, his path forward would be anything but certain. Morinaga's early education reflected this uncertainty. While the court showered attention on the crown prince, Morinaga was quietly groomed in the arts of diplomacy and strategy, learning from the experienced advisors who surrounded his father. But it was clear that even at such a young age, Morinaga possessed the spirit of a leader, an unshakable determination to one day see his family's power restored, even if he was not first in line to the throne. "Your destiny will be forged in the fires of conflict," one of his tutors said to him, a seasoned war strategist. "Never forget that, Prince. The empire is not ruled by mere lineage, but by those who are strong enough to seize it." Morinaga nodded solemnly, his young eyes reflecting the weight of those words. He knew that in the world he was born into, loyalty could change in an instant, and political ambition was the one thing that could never be trusted. His father's dreams of restoring the imperial family to its rightful place were noble, but Morinaga understood that they would come at a cost. As the years passed, Morinaga's role within the court grew more pronounced. His presence at meetings and strategy sessions was no longer that of a mere observer, but of a young man preparing to play his part in a game far beyond his years. Though still a boy, he felt the currents of power shifting all around him, a constant reminder of the unstable world he was destined to inherit. But while the empire wavered, one thing was clear. Morinaga was not a prince who would sit idly by. His mind raced with thoughts of the future of a Japan where the emperor reigned supreme once again. He would not be relegated to the shadows of history as just a secondary figure. His legacy, he swore, would be written with action. And so, the second prince of Japan, born into a world of political strife, set his eyes on a destiny far grander than anyone could have predicted. His journey, one of incredible sacrifice and heartbreak, was just beginning. From the moment he could walk, Prince Morinaga's early life at the imperial court was filled with a mixture of luxury and expectation. The imperial palace in Kyoto was a vast and intricate world full of towering wooden structures, lavish gardens, and finely dressed courtiers who moved like silent shadows through the halls. Yet beneath the rich silk tapestries and the glowing lanterns that adorned the corridors, the whispers of political scheming were always present, threading their way through every conversation. Morinaga's formative years were shaped by the presence of powerful figures. Despite being the second son, there was an undeniable sense that the fate of the empire rested upon his shoulders as much as upon his elder brother, Crown Prince Atsuhira. The courtiers would often talk of the future, of how the young prince would have to carry the weight of his family's legacy. And Morinaga, even in his early years, was aware of the burden placed upon him. But it was not just his family's legacy that weighed on him. It was the knowledge that Japan was in a state of flux, caught between the waning power of the imperial court and the unyielding dominance of the Kamakura shogunate. "Remember, my son," his mother would often say to him, "the imperial throne is not only a symbol of power, it is a symbol of duty. You must understand the pulse of the court. Learn how to listen, even when silence speaks the loudest." He took her words to heart, and it wasn't long before he became known among the courtiers for his keen sense of observation. Morinaga, though still a child, had a sharp mind, and he quickly became adept at reading the dynamics of the court. He learned the subtle art of negotiation, watching his father carefully as he navigated the complex relationships with the various factions that vied for control. Despite the expectations that came with his birth, there were moments in Morinaga's early life when the weight of it all seemed too much for a boy his age. He would retreat to the gardens of the palace, where the scent of the chrysanthemums and the sound of the koi swimming in the ponds would bring him a brief escape from the ceaseless pressure of court life. It was in these moments that he found solace, his mind wandering to thoughts of a Japan where peace and stability could be restored under the rightful rule of the imperial family. But peace was not something the young prince could afford to dream of for long. His life was one of preparation, and the court knew it. He spent his days under the tutelage of the empire's greatest minds, scholars who taught him the ancient texts of Japan's rich cultural history, strategists who instilled in him the importance of military tactics, and elders who shared with him the delicate balance of diplomacy. His studies were intense, as was the pressure placed upon him to master the art of leadership. At times, his father would summon him to the throne room, where Emperor Go-Daigo, with a sense of both pride and concern, would ask him questions about the state of the realm. "Tell me, Morinaga," Go-Daigo would say, his voice a mix of challenge and affection. "What is the fate of the imperial throne if we do nothing?" Morinaga, young as he was, would look into his father's eyes, knowing the weight of the question. He knew his father dreamed of reclaiming the power the imperial family had lost. But Morinaga also understood that it was not a dream that could easily be realized. "Father," Morinaga would reply, his voice steady despite his youth, "if we do nothing, then we will be forgotten. Our people will be ruled by those who are stronger. The imperial family will become a mere symbol." His father would nod thoughtfully, a mixture of admiration and sadness crossing his face. Go-Daigo saw in his son not just a prince, but the potential to shape the future of Japan. But he also knew the price of that potential. The road ahead was fraught with danger, and the political landscape was unforgiving. Every day, the shogunate grew stronger, and every day, the imperial family seemed to slip further from their former glory. Still, Morinaga pressed forward. His early years in the court were not only a time of learning, but also a time of silent rebellion against the confines of his role. He wanted to be more than just a figurehead, more than a second son, quietly waiting for his turn. He wanted to be a force for change. Though still a boy, he carried within him the burning desire to restore his family's honor, to take back what had been lost. But for now, all he could do was watch, listen, and learn. His formative years were spent honing the skills that would serve him in the years to come. Skills that would not only be tested on the battlefield, but in the quiet halls of power, where the true battles of feudal Japan were fought. He knew that in time his moment would come, but until then, he would stand ready. And as the years passed, Morinaga's resolve only grew stronger. The young prince, once a mere child in the shadow of the imperial throne, was beginning to understand what it truly meant to carry the weight of the empire on his shoulders. It would not be an easy path, but it would be his path, and he would walk it with determination, even if it meant facing unimaginable trials ahead. As Prince Morinaga grew, so did his understanding of the fractured political landscape that shaped his childhood. Though he spent his days within the opulent walls of the imperial palace, where silks and jewels dazzled the eye, beyond its gates, Japan was caught in the vice of political struggle. The imperial family, once the supreme authority, now held little power. The real power rested in the hands of the Kamakura shogunate, an institution that had risen to prominence nearly a century earlier and had solidified its grip on Japan's military and political affairs. Morinaga's father, Emperor Go-Daigo, would often speak in private of his desire to reclaim the throne's power, but these moments of frustration were always tempered by the cold, inescapable reality that the shogunate's influence extended far beyond Kyoto. In the quiet of the palace chambers, Go-Daigo would voice his grievances to his closest advisors. "Do you not see," he would mutter, pacing in the dim light of his study, "the shogunate is a parasite draining the vitality of the imperial throne. If we do not act now, we will lose everything." Morinaga, still a boy, had heard these words more than once. He would sit in silence, absorbing the weight of his father's frustration. As the second son, he knew his destiny was uncertain, but he also knew that the future of the entire imperial family rested on a precarious edge, teetering between renewal and collapse. One day, as Morinaga wandered through the palace gardens, his tutor, an elder statesman named Kawashima, approached him. The old man was a former general who had served under the imperial family's previous reign, and his wisdom was as sharp as his memories of the old court. "Do you know," Prince Kawashima said, gesturing toward the distant horizon where the Kamakura shogunate's influence loomed like a dark cloud, "that the shogunate has been in power for almost a century. The Hojo clan, in particular, has extended its reach into every part of Japan. The imperial family, your family, is now but a figurehead." Morinaga nodded quietly, his young mind turning over the words. He had heard the name Hojo many times, a family whose power had grown by the sword and through their manipulation of the shogunate's military forces. The Hojo regents, though officially serving the shogun, had controlled the country's military and administrative decisions for generations. The imperial family, once the heart of Japan's governance, now seemed nothing more than a decorative relic. They call the Hojo the true rulers of Japan. Kawashima continued, his tone heavy with bitterness. "The emperor holds no true power. Even your father, as much as he may wish to reclaim it, is constrained by their rule. It is a bitter truth." Morinaga looked at the ground, his thoughts racing. The more he learned, the clearer it became. His family was imprisoned not in chains, but in an invisible cage made of the shogunate's power. The emperor could give orders, but they were often ignored by the shogunate, or worse, used as leverage for their own political gain. As the years passed, the young prince's understanding of the Kamakura shogunate grew deeper. He saw firsthand how the shogunate's reach extended into the very fabric of society. The military presence in Kyoto was immense, and the samurai, those fierce, loyal warriors, were the backbone of the shogunate's rule. It wasn't just the military strength that held sway, but also the intricate network of alliances, bribes, and threats that ensured the shogunate's dominance. One afternoon, while Morinaga and his older brother, Crown Prince Atsuhira, walked through the palace halls, Morinaga asked the question that had been on his mind for years. "Brother," he said, his voice tinged with curiosity, "why does the emperor not act against the shogunate? Why does father not seek to challenge them openly?" Atsuhira, always more reserved and less inclined to speak of such matters, looked away for a moment as if struggling to find the right words. "Morinaga," he finally replied, "it is not as simple as you think. The shogunate controls the army. They control the land. They control the very people we rely on. Our family may hold the title of emperor, but it is the shogunate that holds the power." Morinaga felt a pang of frustration but suppressed it. He had always admired his older brother, but he could not help but feel that Atsuhira, for all his wisdom, was resigned to the way things were. Morinaga, on the other hand, could not fathom accepting this as his fate. "There must be something we can do," Morinaga said quietly, more to himself than to Atsuhira. "We can't let Japan slip further into their hands." Atsuhira looked at him with a sad smile. "It is not the shogunate we should fear, Morinaga. It is the fate of the imperial family. They have not forgotten us. They simply wait for us to make a mistake." In the years that followed, Morinaga would come to realize the complexity of this political web. The Kamakura shogunate, while seeming like an unstoppable force, was itself a fragile institution. The shogunate's power was built on the military might of the samurai, but there were deep fractures beneath the surface fractures that the Hojo regents had spent years covering up. As Morinaga learned, there were many who resented the Hojo's control, not just within the imperial family, but also within the ranks of the samurai. Many believed that Japan's true rulers should not be a military family, but the emperor and his court. Though Morinaga was still a young man, he understood one fundamental truth. Japan's future would be decided not by who held the title of emperor, but by who had the strength and the will to take it back. His early years spent in the shadow of the Kamakura shogunate had shown him that if the imperial family was to survive, they would need more than just a claim to the throne. They would need to reclaim the power that had once been theirs, and Morinaga was determined to be the one to do it. As Morinaga grew older, the tension between the imperial family and the shogunate became more palpable, like a storm brewing on the horizon. The Kamakura shogunate had held sway over Japan for nearly a century, and its influence was woven into every aspect of the country's political and military systems. The Hojo regents, who controlled the shogunate, had long maintained their grip on power by manipulating both the military and the court, often using the emperor as a mere figurehead. In the halls of the imperial palace, the conversations were fraught with anxiety, and the walls seemed to vibrate with the quiet hum of discontent. Emperor Go-Daigo, once a symbol of the nation's authority, had become a mere shadow of his former self. His ambitions to restore the imperial family's power were clear to those around him, but the path was fraught with danger. The shogunate, with its well-entrenched network of loyal samurai, seemed an unmovable force. One evening in the private chambers of the Emperor Go-Daigo spoke in hushed tones to his closest advisors. His face, usually a picture of calm authority, now betrayed signs of frustration. The shogunate's grip on this land grows tighter by the day, the emperor said, his voice low, but filled with unmistakable determination. The Hojo regents control the army. They control the military estates. They have become the true rulers of Japan. I will not stand by while my family's legacy is reduced to nothing but a name. Morinaga then, in his mid-teens, stood silently in the corner of the room, listening intently. His father's words filled him with a sense of purpose, but also dread. He could feel the weight of the situation. The emperor's frustration was not merely political, it was personal. For decades, the Hojo regents had manipulated the imperial family, treating them as nothing more than ceremonial figures in a carefully crafted power structure. The imperial court, once the heart of Japan's governance, now seemed like an ancient relic of a bygone era. Your Majesty, one of the senior courtiers, a trusted advisor named Hoshina, spoke cautiously. The shogunate has deep roots. They control not only the military, but also the economy and the people. Any move against them would be met with fierce resistance. If you seek to reclaim power, we must tread carefully. Morinaga watched his father closely, noting the tension in his posture. Go-Daigo's eyes were fixed on the ground, as if he were weighing every word. I am well aware of the risks, Go-Daigo replied, his voice steady but resolute. But we cannot remain idle. If we are to restore the honor of the imperial family, we must take action. If we do nothing, the shogunate will continue to erode the foundations of our country. Morinaga's heart raced as the emperor's words sank in. His father had long spoken of the restoration of the imperial power, but now there was an unmistakable sense of urgency in his tone. The shogunate's power was vast, and for the first time, Morinaga could sense the enormous stakes of the struggle. This was not just about political power. It was about the very survival of the imperial family and the future of Japan itself. The tension between the two powers was more than just a matter of court politics. It was a conflict that affected every aspect of society. The shogunate samurai, once loyal to the emperor, had been gradually transformed into a separate class with its own loyalties and ambitions. The feudal system had created a division between the samurai and the court aristocracy, and this divide was deepening. The shogunate had cleverly exploited these divisions, securing its place at the top of the political ladder. Meanwhile, the imperial family had to contend not only with external enemies, but also with internal divisions. The emperor's court was filled with factions, each with its own vision for Japan's future. Some courtiers supported Go-Daigo's ambition to reclaim power, while others were more cautious, hesitant to challenge the shogunate directly. The conflicting interests within the imperial family mirrored the broader political struggles in Japan. It was during this time that Morinaga's resolve began to take shape. He had been trained in the art of diplomacy and strategy, but now the stakes were personal. He could no longer remain a passive observer. He could see the growing rift between his father's vision for a restored imperial reign and the shogunate's unyielding control. The court was full of whispers, both of hope and fear. On one particularly tense evening, Morinaga sat with his older brother, Atsuhira, in the palace gardens. The evening air was cool, and the distant sounds of the court seemed muted in the quiet of the garden. Atsuhira Morinaga said, his voice betraying a hint of impatience. "Why do we wait so long? Why do we allow the shogunate to continue its reign while the imperial family is reduced to this?" Atsuhira, who was always the more cautious of the two, looked at Morinaga with a somber expression. "Because it is not as simple as you think," Atsuhira replied. "The shogunate's strength is built on more than just military might. They have support in every corner of this country. Our people are afraid of change, and those who are not are loyal to the shogunate, not to the emperor." Morinaga clenched his fists, the weight of his brother's words settling heavily upon him. The struggle would not be easy, but he knew that the imperial family could not sit idly by forever. The time would come when the tensions between the imperial family and the shogunate would reach a breaking point. And when it did, Morinaga would be ready. In the years that followed, as the political landscape of Japan shifted and the shogunate's power continued to grow, Morinaga would find himself at the center of the conflict, caught between his father's ambitions and the harsh realities of the shogunate's dominance. The tensions that had simmered for decades were on the verge of boiling over, and Prince Morinaga would be forced to choose where his loyalty truly lay. This was not just the story of one prince. It was the story of an entire nation on the brink of upheaval, and Morinaga's path would lead him through the heart of that struggle, where heroism, betrayal, and tragedy awaited. As Prince Morinaga entered his teenage years, his education in governance, war strategy, and the intricacies of courtly life became increasingly important. the future of the imperial family, and by extension, Japan itself, seemed to rest on his shoulders. No longer a child playing in the gardens of the palace, he was thrust into the complex world of politics, military tactics, and diplomacy. His tutors, carefully chosen by his father, were among the most learned and respected figures in Japan. The first lessons Morinaga received were in governance, understanding how a nation was built not just on military strength, but on the delicate balance of power law and diplomacy. The emperor, though constrained by the shogunate's control, still held the moral and symbolic power of the nation. Morinaga's early lessons were steeped in the rich history of Japan's imperial line, teaching him that a ruler's strength came not just from their authority, but also from their ability to unite and guide the people. The head of his education in governance was an elderly courtier named Saito, a man who had served the imperial family for decades. Saito's manner was stern but kind, and he immediately set the tone for Morinaga's education. "Your Highness," Saito said one morning as they sat in a chamber overlooking the imperial gardens, "the imperial family is not just the ruler of the land. You are also the custodian of Japan's soul, its culture, and its future. Governance is not a matter of ruling with an iron fist, but guiding the hearts and minds of the people." Morinaga listened intently, trying to absorb the gravity of Saito's words. He understood the concept of rule, but the idea that the emperor must also be a spiritual guide, a moral compass for the nation, struck him deeply. "To rule," Saito continued, "is to understand the needs of your people, to adapt to changing times while preserving the sacred traditions of our ancestors. You must be both a scholar and a warrior, a diplomat and a ruler." Morinaga's education was not confined to the confines of the imperial court. It extended into the military strategies that had shaped Japan for centuries. The shogunate, after all, was a military power, and if the imperial family were to reclaim its authority, it would need the support of the samurai, the backbone of Japan's military strength. Under the guidance of General Okamoto, an old and revered strategist, Morinaga studied the great battles of Japan's past. Okamoto's lessons were intense and often brutal in their realism. "War," Okamoto would say, his voice rasping with experience, "is a game of patience and precision. You will face enemies who are swift, powerful, and ruthless. But it is not brute strength alone that wins battles. It is the mind behind the sword. Learn strategy, learn the land, and never underestimate your opponent." One afternoon, as the two stood before a model of the land around Kyoto, Okamoto laid out a series of miniature wooden soldiers on a map. "Look here," he said, pointing to the hills north of the capital. "This is the key to Kyoto. If you can control this pass, you control the road to the heart of the city. The shogunate's forces understand this, which is why they hold it so tightly. But you, Prince, must learn how to think beyond the obvious. Morinaga leaned in, examining the battlefield. He had learned to read maps, to understand the strategic value of terrain. But the true lessons came not from books or models. They came from the old general stories of bloodshed, sacrifice, and victory. Okamoto would recount battles with such vividness that Morinaga could almost feel the heat of the battlefield on his own skin. It's not enough to simply defend what you have, Okamoto continued. You must be willing to strike when your enemy least expects it. Never show all your cards at once. Keep them guessing. A battle is won, not in the clash of swords, but in the planning of each move, long before the first arrow is shot. Morinaga's time under Okamoto was marked by long, grueling days spent studying the strategies of war. Yet, despite the intensity of his military training, he never lost sight of the courtly life that surrounded him. The intricacies of court politics, the delicate dance of power and diplomacy were just as vital to his education as any military campaign. The court, though filled with advisors, scholars, and statesmen, was also a world of subtlety and intrigue. Every conversation had multiple layers, and every gesture, every word could carry weight far beyond its immediate meaning. Morinaga's tutor in courtly life was Lady Aiko, a sharp-witted woman who had risen through the ranks of the court with a blend of grace and cunning. She had served several emperors and knew better than anyone how to navigate the volatile politics of the palace. Do not let appearances fool you, Morinaga, Lady Aiko would say, as they sat in the serene tea garden, sipping their tea in the quiet of the early morning. In the court, allies are often enemies in disguise. A smile may hide a dagger. You must learn to read the subtext of every word spoken, every glance exchanged. Trust only those who have proven their loyalty with action, not just words. It was from Lady Aiko that Morinaga learned the finer points of court diplomacy, how to forge alliances, how to manage enemies, and most importantly, how to maintain a delicate balance of power. Every day spent in her company was a masterclass in the art of subtle manipulation and persuasion. Morinaga learned quickly that in the world of the imperial court, public displays of power were often less effective than quiet behind-the-scenes maneuvering. Never show your hand too early, Lady Aiko often advised. The court is a stage, and you are both the actor and the playwright. Control the narrative, and you control the outcome. As Morinaga's education progressed, He began to see how all these lessons interwove: the strategies of war, the understanding of governance, and the subtle art of courtly life were not separate entities. They were all aspects of the same struggle. The shogunate was a military power, yes, but they were also part of a larger game, a game of influence, alliances, and betrayals. Prince Morinaga's education was far from complete, but it had given him the tools he needed to understand the weight of his position. He was no longer just a boy caught in the shadows of history. He was a prince with a purpose, a future leader in a divided nation, and a young man preparing to face the storm that would one day determine the fate of the Imperial family. Through these years of training, Morinaga's mind had been sharpened, his resolve solidified, and his understanding of the delicate balance of power, both on the battlefield and in the court, had grown immeasurably. The time would come when these lessons would be tested not in the safety of the palace, but in the very heart of Japan's most dangerous political and military struggles. And when that time came, Morinaga would be ready. As the years passed, Morinaga's sense of duty to the throne grew increasingly profound, and with it, his desire to restore the imperial power that had been steadily eroded by the Kamakura shogunate. This was no longer just a matter of royal blood or the mere inheritance of a title. For Morinaga, it became a personal mission, a burning conviction that he was destined to reclaim what had been lost and to revive the glory of the imperial family, which had been overshadowed for too long by the shogunate's military rule. It wasn't just the lessons from his tutors that fueled this growing sense of duty. It was the very air of the imperial court, thick with both the weight of tradition and the frustration of its current impotence. Each time he passed through the grand halls of the palace adorned with centuries-old tapestries and sculptures, the silent, heavy presence of the past seemed to speak to him. He could almost hear the echoes of the emperors who had once ruled Japan with unquestioned authority, their spirits lingering in the ancient stones. One evening, as Morinaga walked alone through the palace gardens reflecting on his lessons, he was approached by his father, Emperor Go-Daigo. The emperor had long been a figure of quiet determination, but there were times when the weight of the shogunate's power seemed to bend even him. Tonight, however, his expression was resolute, his eyes alight with a quiet fire. Morinaga the emperor began, his voice soft but filled with an undeniable urgency. Do you understand the importance of our family's role in Japan? The imperial family is more than just a title. It is a symbol of the unity of our people and the continuity of the nation. Morinaga nodded, his mind still processing the lessons of his tutors, but now feeling the full weight of his father's words. I understand, Father, but how can we restore what has been taken from us, Morinaga's voice was tinged with both uncertainty and hope. The shogunate controls everything. They hold the army, the land, the people. How can we fight against something so entrenched? Go-Daigo looked at him for a long moment, as though weighing the depths of his son's words. You are right to question this, my son. The shogunate's grip on Japan is strong, and it will take more than just a few words to shake it. But that is precisely why we must act. The imperial family's power is not just military, it is spiritual. We are the soul of Japan, the rightful heirs to its throne. It is time to show the people that the imperial house has not forgotten its purpose. The emperor's words ignited something deep inside Morinaga. He had always felt the weight of the throne's legacy, but now, with his father's voice urging him forward, he felt a sense of responsibility more powerful than he had ever imagined. The desire to restore the imperial family was no longer just about reasserting control. It was about restoring honor to a country that had long been divided. That night, as he lay in his chamber, Morinaga found himself staring at the shadows cast by the flickering lanterns, his thoughts racing. The shogunate had undermined the imperial family for so long, using its military might to manipulate the court and impose its own rule over Japan. Morinaga knew that regaining the throne would require more than just a political move. It would require an upheaval, a battle not just for power, but for the soul of the nation. The next morning, as Morinaga joined his father for breakfast in the imperial palace, he spoke again. I will fight for the throne, father. I will restore what has been taken from us. His voice, though still young, was steady with newfound resolve. Go-Daigo looked at his son, a mixture of pride and caution in his eyes. I know, Morinaga. I have always known that you would be the one to carry our family's legacy. But you must also understand the cost. This is not a fight for glory, it is a fight for survival. If you are to succeed, you must be prepared to sacrifice everything, including your life. Morinaga stood a little straighter, the weight of his father's words sinking deep within him. His duty to the throne was not a choice, it was his fate. The empire's strength and its future rested on his shoulders, and he was determined to carry that weight no matter the cost. In the days that followed, Morinaga's education took on new urgency. He immersed himself in the political intrigue of the court, observing the subtle alliances and betrayals that were woven into every conversation. He studied the movements of the samurai, the men who held the power to decide the fate of the nation. Morinaga knew that if the imperial family were to rise again, they would need the support of the samurai, the very warriors who had once been loyal to the throne but were now bound by their allegiance to the shogunate. During this time, he began to speak more openly of his vision to those he trusted, though he carefully chose his words. He knew that the political situation was delicate. Any overt declaration of rebellion would be met with swift and brutal retaliation. But Morinaga could no longer remain silent. The imperial family's future depended on action, not on waiting for the shogunate to give up its hold on power. One afternoon, as Morinaga sat in his chamber with a few trusted allies, he spoke quietly but with great passion. "We must act soon. The shogunate grows stronger by the day, but there are cracks beneath the surface. Many in the samurai class are dissatisfied. They are not loyal to the Hojo regents. They are loyal to the emperor. It is time to awaken that loyalty." His closest confidant, a samurai named Takeda, nodded. "There are whispers, Prince. Whispers of discontent in the ranks. But we must be careful. If we move too soon, we risk everything." "I understand." Morinaga replied, his gaze unwavering. "But we cannot wait forever. The imperial family is the soul of Japan. We must remind the people of that. We must show them that we are more than a title. We are the heart of this land." As Morinaga's sense of duty grew stronger, so did his resolve to restore the imperial family's power. He would no longer stand by and watch as the shogunate continued to strip away the legacy of his ancestors. His fate was now intertwined with the fate of Japan itself, and he would stop at nothing to fulfill the duty he felt so deeply in his soul: to reclaim the throne for the people of Japan and restore the dignity and honor of the imperial family. As Morinaga's sense of duty grew, so too did the looming threat of an inevitable confrontation between the imperial family and the Kamakura shogunate. The shogunate's power had entrenched itself in every corner of Japan, and the Hojo regents who controlled the military had become more than just figures of political authority. They were the true rulers. The imperial family, once the pinnacle of power in Japan, had been relegated to the sidelines, their influence diminished by a shogunate that had usurped their authority. Yet for all the shogunate's control, one thing remained certain: Go-Daigo, the emperor, would never accept this fate. His determination to restore the imperial family's power burned brighter with each passing day. In the quiet corridors of the imperial palace, Emperor Go-Daigo would often speak with his most trusted advisors, his voice low but filled with growing resolve. He had long known that his family's power was not only under threat from the shogunate, but that the imperial court had become a shadow of its former glory, lacking the influence to sway the nation's future. But now, in the wake of years of frustration and watching his ancestors' legacy crumble under the weight of the Hojo regency, Go-Daigo reached a critical decision. He would rise up, He would not let the imperial family fall into irrelevance. One night, Go-Daigo summoned his son Morinaga into his private chambers. The emperor's face, usually marked with the calm composure of royalty, now bore the traces of a deep personal conviction. As Morinaga entered, he was struck by the intensity in his father's eyes. It was clear that Go-Daigo had made up his mind. Morinaga, Go-Daigo began, his voice firm. I've watched as the shogunate has weakened us. They've taken our authority, and with it the soul of our nation. But no longer. I have come to a decision. It is time for the imperial family to rise once more. We will fight back against the Hojo. Morinaga stood silently absorbing the weight of his father's words. He had heard the emperor speak of resistance in the past, but there had always been an air of uncertainty, a belief that the shogunate's grip was too strong, that rebellion was a fool's dream. But now, Go-Daigo's words carried a weight that Morinaga could not ignore. This was not just a call to action. It was a declaration of war against the very structure that had governed Japan for nearly a century. We will need allies, Father Morinaga said quietly, his voice steady but filled with a sense of urgency. The shogunate has power in every province, control of the samurai, and the support of the people in the military. We cannot fight them alone. Go-Daigo nodded gravely, understanding the depth of his son's words. I know, Morinaga, but there are cracks in the shogunate's power. The Hojo regents may have secured the loyalty of the samurai, but not all of them are loyal to their cause. There are many in the samurai class who still hold allegiance to the imperial family. We must awaken that loyalty. Go-Daigo's decision to rise up was not one made lightly. He had been watching the shifts in the political landscape for years, studying the tensions within the samurai ranks and the growing discontent with the Hojo regents. Beneath the surface of the seemingly unbreakable shogunate, Go-Daigo believed there were fissures waiting to be exploited. Loyalty to the emperor was still alive in many parts of Japan, and he intended to spark it into action. The plan was simple, yet fraught with danger. Go-Daigo would issue a call to arms, rallying those who were still loyal to the imperial family. The goal was to create a rebellion, a movement that would slowly gain momentum across the country, eventually culminating in a direct confrontation with the shogunate. It would be a fight for the throne, and more importantly, a fight to restore the imperial family's rightful place at the head of the nation. In the days that followed, Morinaga was deeply involved in the planning. The decision to rise up against the shogunate was not one that could be made on a whim. Every move had to be calculated. If they were to succeed, they would need to gain the support of the samurai, the warriors who held the true power in Japan. To do this, they would need to convince the samurai that their loyalty to the emperor was more important than their fealty to the Hojo regents. One afternoon, Morinaga gathered a group of trusted samurai who had long held loyalty to the imperial family. Among them was Takeda, the samurai who had once been Morinaga's closest ally and now a key figure in the rebellion. Takeda Morinaga said as they stood in the courtyard overlooking the quiet expanse of the palace grounds, "The time has come. We are preparing to rise up against the shogunate. I need your men. We need the samurai to stand with us." Takeda's face was unreadable, but Morinaga could see the flicker of resolve in his eyes. "We've waited for this moment for years," Prince Takeda replied. "The Hojo have weakened our country, and many of us have grown tired of their rule. You have our swords." But even as the seeds of rebellion were being sown, Go-Daigo knew that the road ahead would be treacherous. He was aware of the cost. If the rebellion failed, the imperial family would be doomed. The shogunate would not hesitate to crush them, and Japan's future would remain in the hands of the military elite. Still, Go-Daigo's conviction was unshaken. The time to act had arrived. "We must strike at the heart of their power," Go-Daigo said to Morinaga in a private meeting later that evening. "The shogunate controls Kyoto through its samurai, but we can reclaim the people's faith. We must win the hearts of the common folk, the farmers and artisans who have been oppressed by the Hojo." Morinaga listened closely, realizing that his father's vision extended far beyond the battlefield. This was not just about military might. It was about restoring the trust and confidence of the people in the imperial family. Go-Daigo's plan was to bring about a cultural and political renaissance, one that would unite Japan under the banner of the emperor once more. But even as they began to move forward with their plans, Morinaga understood the full weight of the decision. This was no longer just a rebellion. It was the beginning of a civil war that would tear Japan apart. In the end, the struggle between the imperial family and the shogunate would not just determine who ruled the country, it would decide the very future of Japan. The emperor's decision to rise up was a declaration of defiance, a refusal to let the shogunate continue to dismantle the legacy of the imperial family. For Morinaga, this moment would mark the beginning of a journey that would test his loyalty, his courage, and his commitment to restoring the honor of his ancestors. He was ready to fight not just for the throne, but for the soul of Japan itself. As the preparations for rebellion gathered momentum, Morinaga's decision to join his father in the Genko War was both a personal and political turning point in his life. The call to arms was no longer just an abstract desire To restore imperial power, it had become an urgent necessity. The Emperor Go-Daigo's vision for a revitalized imperial family, one that would break free from the shackles of the shogunate, had grown into a full-fledged plan. In 1331, Go-Daigo made his move, ultimately deciding to launch a rebellion that would not only seek to reclaim the imperial throne, but also restore the rightful authority of the emperor over the entire country. For Morinaga, the decision to take up arms alongside his father was not one made lightly. He had spent his youth learning the ways of governance, war strategy, and diplomacy. But now, the true test of his resolve had arrived. As he stood beside his father in the palace, listening to the murmurs of his loyal generals and advisors, Morinaga knew that this was the moment that would define both his future and the future of Japan. Father Morinaga said one evening after the plan had been laid out in a series of secret meetings, "I will fight beside you. We must not let this chance slip away." Go-Daigo looked at his son, pride and concern written in the lines of his face. Morinaga, this is not a simple rebellion. This is a battle for our family's very survival. If we fail, we may lose everything, and so will you. But Morinaga's resolve was unwavering. He had been training for years, both in the martial arts and in the delicate art of leadership, and now the time had come to put his knowledge to use. The thought of reclaiming the imperial power and restoring the rightful sovereignty of his family filled him with a sense of duty that could not be ignored. He understood the risks, but he also understood the stakes. The survival of the imperial family, the legacy of his ancestors, and the future of Japan itself rested on this moment. "I have no choice, Father. I will not watch our family's honor be erased by the shogunate. I will fight to the end, not just for you, but for Japan." Go-Daigo nodded, a deep sigh escaping his lips. He knew that his son's words were not just the passion of youth. They were the echo of a deep internal calling that had been shaped by years of personal sacrifice and duty. Morinaga was ready, and Go-Daigo could not let him turn back now. In the months that followed, Morinaga was at the forefront of organizing the military forces that would rise against the shogunate. The rebellion was not without its challenges. The shogunate, led by the Hojo regents, had a well-trained army and control over the key military strongholds across Japan. But Go-Daigo and Morinaga understood the critical importance of rallying not only the samurai, but also the common people. The imperial family's legitimacy came not only from their bloodline, but from the people's belief in their right to rule. Morinaga played a key role in securing alliances with powerful samurai families who had grown disillusioned with the shogunate's rule. He traveled across the provinces, meeting with those who had once sworn loyalty to the imperial family, convincing them that now was the time to rise up and restore Japan to its rightful order. One such meeting took place in the city of Nara, where Morinaga and a group of loyal samurai gathered in the shadow of ancient temples. Takeda, the samurai, who had long been Morinaga's most trusted ally, stood beside him as they addressed the assembled warriors. "We fight not just for our honor." Morinaga began, his voice firm, "but for the future of Japan. The shogunate's rule has left this country in a state of decay. It is time for the imperial family to return to lead Japan back to greatness." The response was immediate and resounding. The samurai, though initially hesitant, began to pledge their swords to the imperial cause. Morinaga knew this was crucial. Without the support of the samurai, the rebellion would be doomed before it even began. The samurai were not only the backbone of Japan's military power, but also the cultural symbols of loyalty and strength. By aligning themselves with the emperor, they would be signaling their rejection of the shogunate's authority. Yet despite these gains, the challenges were vast. The shogunate, upon learning of the imperial family's rebellion, responded swiftly. The battle lines were drawn, and Japan stood on the brink of war. In 1331, after a series of skirmishes, Go-Daigo was forced to flee the capital Kyoto and retreat to the mountains of Yoshino. Morinaga, however, remained steadfast by his side, committed to the cause, even as the imperial family found itself backed into a corner. The Genko War, named for the imperial family's attempt to restore the gen or rightful rule of the emperor, was now in full swing. The conflict, which spanned from 1331 to 1333, would define Morinaga's legacy and the fate of Japan. "Father, we cannot retreat any longer," Morinaga said one night as they gathered with their loyal generals in the mountain stronghold of Yoshino. "The shogunate will not stop until we are defeated. We must strike now before they can regroup." Go-Daigo's eyes glinted with determination. "You're right, Morinaga. We may be outnumbered, but we are fighting for more than just a throne. We are fighting for Japan's soul. We cannot allow the Hojo to continue their rule." The following days were filled with desperate skirmishes and tense negotiations as the imperial forces, though smaller in number, began to take the fight to the shogunate's military strongholds. Morinaga fought with relentless courage, leading troops in fierce battles against the shogunate's forces. The imperial family, though outnumbered, was bolstered by the people's growing discontent with the shogunate's oppression. But despite the victories won on the battlefield, the tide of war was not so easily turned. The shogunate's forces were numerous, and the imperial family's rebellion seemed to be constantly under siege. Even as Morinaga pushed forward, he could not escape the thought that this would be a long and painful struggle. Yet despite the challenges, the flames of rebellion continued to burn bright. Morinaga's commitment to his father's cause was unwavering. He knew that reclaiming the throne and restoring the power of the imperial family would not come without sacrifice. But the thought of seeing Japan ruled once again by the emperor, a rightful ruler who understood the importance of duty to the people, was enough to drive him forward. As the Genko War raged on, Morinaga's decision to join his father in battle solidified his place in Japan's history. He was no longer just a prince caught in the shadow of the past. He was a key figure in the struggle to restore the nation's future. Through countless battles, fierce loyalty, and personal sacrifice, Morinaga would stand by his father until the war's end, determined to see the imperial family restored, no matter the cost. As the rebellion progressed, Morinaga's military acumen and leadership would be tested like never before. The Genko War was not simply a battle for the imperial throne. It was a struggle for Japan's future, with the fate of the imperial family hanging in the balance. In the face of overwhelming odds, the imperial forces, under Go-Daigo's leadership, and with Morinaga at the forefront, executed a series of military campaigns that would determine the course of the nation's history. After Go-Daigo's initial flight to the mountains of Yoshino in 1331, the imperial forces began their campaign with a combination of guerrilla warfare and strategic strikes. Morinaga, deeply involved in the planning and execution of these early operations, understood that they could not match the shogunate's superior numbers directly, but they could exploit the cracks in the shogunate's power. The key was to create instability within the enemy ranks, leveraging both military tactics and the discontent among the samurai who were growing weary of Hojo rule. The first significant confrontation came in 1332 in the Battle of Sanjo, where the imperial forces, despite being outnumbered, executed a surprise attack against the shogunate's military units stationed near Kyoto. Morinaga, recognizing the critical need for a quick victory to maintain morale, led a small contingent of cavalry, strategically positioning them on the high ground overlooking the battlefield. From this vantage point, they unleashed a devastating series of archery volleys, raining arrows down on the shogunate's forces below. The imperial forces, using the element of surprise, were able to push the shogunate's soldiers back, inflicting heavy casualties and forcing them into a retreat. This victory at Sanjo, though not decisive in the grand scheme of the war, sent shock waves through the shogunate and ignited hope among the common people and samurai loyal to the emperor. For the first time in years, it seemed that the imperial family could once again challenge the shogunate's dominance. But the true turning point came in 1333 with the siege of Kamakura, the shogunate's last stronghold. Morinaga, now fully committed to the cause, played a key role in the meticulous planning of this campaign. While the shogunate had fortified Kamakura with a formidable defense, Morinaga understood that the key to victory would not be a straightforward siege. Instead, he adopted a strategy that combined psychological warfare, disruption of the shogunate's supply lines, and covert missions aimed at sowing discord within the enemy's ranks. One of Morinaga's most brilliant moves was to cut off the shogunate's vital supply lines, forcing the defenders in Kamakura to rely on dwindling food and resources. While the shogunate's forces attempted to hold their ground, Morinaga's forces, aided by Takauji's Ashikaga clan and other disillusioned samurai, slowly but steadily encircled Kamakura, making it nearly impossible for the Hojo regents to maintain their position. In the months that followed, the defenders grew weary, their resolve weakening as starvation and internal dissent took root. The psychological aspect of the siege played a pivotal role by spreading rumors and misinformation within the city. Morinaga exacerbated the panic among the defenders. The Hojo regents, who had once commanded great authority, were now increasingly seen as incapable of protecting their own stronghold. In one of the final acts of the siege, Morinaga led a daring raid that captured several key shogunate commanders, further destabilizing their military chain of command. The fall of Kamakura in 1333 was a devastating blow to the shogunate. The imperial family, having regained their most critical military stronghold, now found themselves on the brink of victory. Yet the battle for control of Japan was far from over. Though the shogunate's reign had collapsed, the remnants of its military forces scattered across Japan, and other powerful clans remained wary of the imperial family's true intentions. Go-Daigo's restoration was marked by great fanfare as the imperial family was officially reinstalled at the center of Japanese governance. However, Morinaga, always the strategist, understood that true stability could only be achieved once the nation was fully united under imperial rule. The samurai who had supported the emperor in the final stages of the war now had to be integrated into the new political system. The remnants of the Hojo clan and their supporters were not easily dismissed, and the rebuilding process would require careful diplomacy and military might. In the months following Kamakura's fall, Morinaga continued to serve as a key military leader, ensuring the smooth consolidation of imperial power in the provinces. His role in securing the loyalty of the samurai was crucial, as many were still loyal to their traditional feudal lords, not the emperor. Through his continued leadership, Morinaga worked to bring order to a country that had been torn apart by decades of shogunate rule. By the end of 1333, the imperial family had reclaimed control of Japan. Go-Daigo, though restored to the throne, was aware that the struggle for Japan's soul was not yet over. The imperial family was now tasked with rebuilding the nation. But Morinaga's involvement in the military campaigns of the Genko War had firmly established him as a figure of immense power and influence. The war had not only secured the throne for the emperor, but had also proven that Morinaga was a tactician of exceptional skill. His strategic brilliance had played a decisive role in bringing down the shogunate. However, even as Morinaga basked in the triumph of the imperial family's restoration, the reality of the post-war political landscape began to take shape. His father's vision for a unified Japan under the emperor's rule would soon face its own challenges. The samurai once loyal to the shogunate now found themselves caught between the old guard and the newly established imperial authority. It was a delicate balancing act, one that would require not just military strategy, but a careful understanding of the intricate web of alliances and loyalties that had sustained feudal Japan for centuries. As Morinaga continued to navigate the complex political landscape, the legacy of the Genko War, the imperial family's restoration, and the downfall of the shogunate remained a testament to his leadership and vision. The military campaigns he led, the battles he fought, and the strategies he devised all played an integral role in the eventual restoration of imperial power, ensuring that Japan would never again fall under the sway of a military dictatorship. Yet the road ahead for Morinaga and the imperial family was far from smooth, and the true challenge of governance had only just begun. The sun had barely risen over the mountains of Yoshino when Prince Morinaga stood before the makeshift war council, his mind heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. His father, Emperor Go-Daigo, had made the decision. They would fight. The imperial family would no longer remain in the shadows of the shogunate. They would reclaim the throne, and with it, the dignity and sovereignty of Japan. But Morinaga knew this would not be easy. The Kamakura shogunate, led by the Hojo clan, had ruled with an iron fist for decades, and they would not relinquish their power without a brutal fight. Father Morinaga set his voice steady despite the rising tension. We cannot simply wait here in Yoshino. The shogunate's forces are still in Kyoto. We must strike before they can regroup. Go-Daigo, ever the visionary, but often cautious, nodded solemnly. I agree, but we need the support of the samurai. We cannot face the Hojo alone. Morinaga's eyes gleamed with determination. I have already sent envoys to the disillusioned samurai clans. They will join us, but only if we show them our resolve. We must prove that the imperial family can still lead, that we are capable of restoring the honor and strength of Japan. Go-Daigo placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a rare sign of affection. You've done well, Morinaga. But the real battle begins now. We must gain not only their swords, but their hearts. As the days passed, Morinaga worked tirelessly to rally the samurai and secure alliances with those who had grown tired of the Hojo's oppressive rule. His diplomatic skill and knowledge of the samurai code were vital. He understood that this rebellion was not just about reclaiming the throne. It was about restoring the very soul of Japan. The Hojo regents, once allies of the imperial family, had betrayed their own honor by seizing power from the emperor and ruling with ruthless control. The samurai, who had once sworn loyalty to the throne, were now pawns in a game of military dominance. Morinaga's role in this delicate web of alliances was crucial. He met secretly with key samurai commanders, convincing them that the true path to honor lay with the emperor, not the Hojo. He reminded them of their ancient oaths, of the bloodline they had once sworn to protect. Your loyalty is not to the Hojo, Morinaga said to one samurai leader, his voice carrying the weight of history. It is to the emperor. Our duty is to the people of Japan. The shogunate may have the power now, but that does not make them the rightful rulers. The samurai, inspired by Morinaga's passion and vision, pledged their swords to the imperial cause. With each passing day, more and more warriors rallied to the banner of the emperor. But despite this growing support, Morinaga knew that they would not be able to defeat the shogunate's forces without a well-coordinated plan. They would have to strike quickly and decisively. The first significant clash came in 1332, in the Battle of Sanjo, a key confrontation between the imperial and shogunate forces near Kyoto. Morinaga, having spent weeks planning the strategy with his military advisors, knew that their success depended on surprise and the ability to outmaneuver the shogunate's larger forces. The battle began at dawn, the rising sun casting long shadows across the field. Morinaga's forces, though outnumbered, had positioned themselves strategically, taking advantage of the terrain. Morinaga had chosen a narrow pass where the shogunate's larger forces would be forced into a tight formation. With his cavalry positioned on the high ground, Morinaga planned to strike swiftly and decisively, hitting the enemy where they were most vulnerable. As the battle unfolded, the imperial forces executed their plan flawlessly. Morinaga, leading a cavalry charge, swept down from the hills, flanking the shogunate's position and cutting off their retreat. The shogunate's forces, caught off guard, were thrown into disarray. Morinaga's troops pressed the advantage, their arrows raining down upon the enemy, causing chaos and confusion. The shogunate, unable to reorganize, was forced to retreat. The victory at Sanjo was not just a military success. It was a morale booster for the imperial cause. It demonstrated that despite the shogunate's control, the imperial family still had the ability to strike back. Morinaga's leadership had turned the tide, and word of the victory spread quickly, sparking further uprisings among those who had long suffered under the shogunate's rule. But the war was far from over. The true test would come with the siege of Kamakura. In 1333, the shogunate stronghold, Kamakura, was heavily fortified and controlled by the Hojo regents who had retreated there after their defeat at Sanjo. Morinaga knew that taking Kamakura would be the key to breaking the shogunate's grip on Japan. For months, the imperial forces laid siege to the city, cutting off its supply lines and slowly tightening their grip. Morinaga's strategy was a careful combination of psychological warfare and military pressure. He knew that the defenders inside Kamakura were growing desperate, and it was only a matter of time before they broke. During this time, Morinaga led several covert operations to sow dissent within the Hojo ranks. He sent emissaries to key samurai commanders within Kamakura, spreading rumors of impending betrayal and convincing them that the Hojo could no longer protect them. The once feared Hojo regents, now isolated and desperate, began to lose the support of their own forces. One fateful night, as the siege dragged on, Morinaga personally led a daring raid into the heart of Kamakura. His cavalry swept through the city's gates, striking swiftly and decisively. The Hojo regents, already on the brink of collapse, were overwhelmed. The imperial forces took control of the city, and with it, the shogunate's power. The fall of Kamakura marked the end of the Hojo clan's rule. In the wake of their defeat, the shogunate's military power crumbled, and the Hojo regents were either captured or forced into exile. The imperial family had regained control of Japan, and the nation began to heal from the wounds inflicted by decades of military rule. Morinaga's role in the defeat of the Kamakura shogunate and the fall of the Hojo clan was crucial. His military brilliance, his ability to rally the samurai, and his unwavering dedication to the imperial cause were key factors in the success of the rebellion. But beyond his tactical genius, it was his vision of a unified Japan under imperial rule that ultimately brought down the shogunate. Through his efforts, Morinaga helped restore the power of the emperor and paved the way for a new chapter in Japanese history. Yet, as Morinaga stood alongside his father in the ruins of Kamakura, he knew that the work was not yet done. The imperial family had reclaimed the throne, but Japan was a nation still divided. The samurai, once loyal to the shogunate, now had to be brought into the fold of the imperial court. The true challenge would be not just in winning battles, but in rebuilding a nation torn apart by years of war and factionalism. But for the first time in decades, Japan was united under the banner of the imperial family, and Morinaga knew that this victory was the beginning of a new era, one where the strength of the imperial family would once again shine through. The dust of battle had hardly settled when the news of Kamakura's fall spread throughout Japan. The shogunate, which had held dominion over the country for nearly a century, was no more. The Hojo regents, now broken and defeated, fled into obscurity, their power shattered by the very force they had once sought to suppress. With the defeat of the shogunate, the way was clear for the imperial family to reclaim the throne, and for the first time in decades, the emperor's voice could once again be heard. On a cold morning in 1333, Emperor Go-Daigo made his triumphant return to Kyoto, the ancient heart of Japan, his family's rightful seat. Morinaga, at his father's side, stood tall and resolute as the imperial procession made its way through the streets. The city, still recovering from the turmoil of the past years, seemed to pulse with the energy of renewed hope. The people, long oppressed under the weight of shogunate rule, now looked to the imperial family as a beacon of stability and legitimacy. The gates of Kyoto, once closed to the emperor, swung open to welcome the rightful ruler back. Crowds gathered in the streets, cheering for the restoration of the throne they had been denied for so long. It was not just the return of the emperor that stirred their hearts, but the promise of a new era, one where Japan could heal from the rift caused by years of military rule. Morinaga's eyes scanned the crowd, a mixture of pride and uncertainty in his heart. The battle had been won, but the real challenge had only just begun. The shogunate's influence may have crumbled, but the fractured political landscape of Japan would require careful rebuilding. The samurai, once loyal to the Hojo, had to be won over, and the common people who had endured years of hardship needed to feel the promise of a better future. As Emperor Go-Daigo ascended the throne once more, Morinaga knew that his role would not be merely ceremonial. His military prowess and strategic brilliance had played a critical role in the imperial family's restoration. But now, it was time to solidify that victory politically. Morinaga's place in the new government was not just as the son of the emperor, but as one of the key figures who would help guide the future of Japan. Within weeks of the restoration, Go-Daigo began the daunting task of re-establishing imperial authority across the nation. He called upon Morinaga to assist in the complex process of reasserting imperial rule over the provinces, many of which were still under the influence of former shogunate supporters. The transition from a military-led government to an imperial one would require more than just the removal of the Hojo. It required the reorganization of power and the assurance that the samurai, the backbone of Japan's feudal system, would remain loyal to the throne. Morinaga, ever the tactician, knew that the imperial family could not afford to alienate the samurai, many of whom had once served the shogunate with unwavering loyalty. If the imperial family was to maintain their hold on power, they needed to integrate the samurai into the new order, not just as warriors, but as partners in governance. Morinaga began traveling from province to province, meeting with key samurai families and assuring them that their loyalty to the emperor would be recognized and rewarded. To restore the emperor's power, Morinaga told a gathering of samurai leaders in the province of Omi, "We must forge a new bond between the throne and the warriors who have sworn to protect it. The imperial family does not seek to dominate the samurai, but to work with them to create a Japan that is both strong and just. Our power lies not in military might alone, but in the loyalty and unity of all who serve this nation." Morinaga's diplomatic efforts were met with some skepticism, but his own reputation as a military leader, combined with his genuine desire to heal the wounds left by the shogunate, won over many of the samurai. Though not all were convinced, the idea of a united Japan under imperial rule began to take root, and with it, the notion that the samurai's role was not just to wield swords, but to help rebuild the country. Meanwhile, in Kyoto, Emperor Go-Daigo focused on re-establishing the legitimacy of the imperial court. His advisors worked tirelessly to ensure that the restoration would not only be a political shift, but a cultural one as well. The imperial family was no longer just a symbol. They had to be a guiding force for Japan's future. Go-Daigo, despite his deep ambition, knew that he could not rebuild the country alone. He relied on Morinaga, his son, and now his closest ally, to help navigate the complex political landscape that lay ahead. Morinaga, the emperor, said one evening as they sat together in the palace, "The war is over, but the peace will be harder to win. We have defeated the shogunate, but now we must unite the nation. We cannot rule with fear as the shogunate did. We must rule with wisdom, with understanding." Morinaga nodded, understanding the weight of his father's words. The empire had been restored, but it was fragile. The samurai, while necessary to maintain order, also posed a threat to the balance of power. The loyalty of the provinces could not be assumed, and the influence of the imperial court had been diminished by years of shogunate rule. "I will do what is necessary." Father Morinaga said, his voice firm, "But we must act quickly. There are many who will seek to challenge our rule. The Hojo may be gone, but their supporters remain. We cannot let our guard down." Morinaga's role as the emperor's closest military advisor became increasingly important as the newly restored imperial government sought to assert its authority. His ability to navigate both the battlefield and the political landscape made him an invaluable asset to Go-Daigo. As the imperial family worked to re-establish their reign, Morinaga's efforts in unifying the samurai and consolidating power in the provinces would shape the future of Japan for generations to come. Yet even as the imperial family celebrated their hard-won victory, Morinaga knew that the restoration was fragile. The samurai, though allied with the throne for now, would not easily forget their previous power under the shogunate. The foundations of the newly restored government were still in flux, and Morinaga could see that maintaining imperial authority would require constant vigilance. His role as a military strategist and political leader had only just begun. The victory over the shogunate was only the first chapter in a long and difficult journey of rebuilding Japan and Morinaga. Now, a key figure in the new imperial government understood that the greatest challenges were yet to come. The restoration of the imperial family had been achieved, but the real work of uniting a fractured nation was only beginning. The struggle to maintain peace and stability in the years ahead would require all of Morinaga's skill, strength, and determination. As the emperor's trusted heir, he would be at the heart of that struggle, forging a path toward a new Japan, one where the imperial family would no longer be a relic of the past, but the cornerstone of the nation's future. The restoration of the imperial family in 1333, after the fall of the Kamakura shogunate, was met with immense joy and hope. However, the euphoria of victory was quickly tempered by the reality of the challenges that lay ahead. While the imperial family had regained the throne, the political landscape of Japan had been irreversibly changed. The samurai, once loyal to the shogunate, now had to be integrated into the new imperial system. But their loyalty was far from guaranteed. In fact, they had been the power brokers in Japan for so long that the imperial court's attempt to reclaim authority created an undercurrent of tension and unease. The clash between the court's desire for control and the military's hold over power threatened to tear the fragile peace apart. Morinaga, now one of the key figures in the newly restored imperial government, found himself at the center of this struggle. His military acumen had been instrumental in the fall of the shogunate and the restoration of the imperial family, but he soon realized that leading an army was very different from leading a nation. The challenge was not simply about winning battles, but about managing the delicate balance of power between the imperial court and the samurai, whose loyalty to the throne was still uncertain. In the months following the restoration, Morinaga's role as both a military leader and a political figure became increasingly complex. The samurai, once the enforcers of the shogunate's rule, now found themselves unsure of their place in the new order. The imperial family, although restored, had not regained the full extent of its former authority. The samurai, who had fought to see the shogunate defeated, were wary of the court's intentions. Many feared that the return of imperial power would reduce their influence and diminish the feudal system that had served them so well. The samurai are not easily ruled, Morinaga, one of the senior courtiers remarked to him one evening after a particularly tense meeting in the imperial court. They have long held power through the sword. Now that the shogunate has fallen, they will not simply accept being subjects of the emperor again. You must be careful how you approach them. Morinaga had always understood the complexities of military power, but he had never fully grasped the intricacies of court politics. The courtiers, steeped in the delicate traditions of the imperial court, viewed the samurai with a mixture of respect and disdain. They were warriors, to be sure, but they were also a threat to the authority of the emperor. The courtiers had spent years in the shadow of the shogunate, and now that the emperor had returned, they were eager to reclaim their former status. Yet they were also wary of the samurai's military power and what that might mean for the future of the court. Morinaga's position was precarious. As a military leader, he commanded the loyalty of many of the samurai, but he also had to answer to his father, Emperor Go-Daigo, whose vision of a unified Japan was not always in sync with the realities of the samurai's power. Father Morinaga said to the emperor one evening after a particularly frustrating council meeting, "We cannot rule the samurai as we would the courtiers. They do not understand the ways of the court, nor do they have any patience for the delicate politics of the palace." Go-Daigo, always patient but deeply concerned, nodded. "I know, Morinaga, but we must not let the samurai dominate the court. The imperial family must remain the center of power. We cannot allow them to take control as they did under the shogunate. We must strike a balance." As the months wore on, the tension between the military and the court continued to grow. The samurai, who had rallied to the imperial cause, now began to demand a greater say in the governance of Japan. Morinaga, deeply aware of their concerns, began to make subtle moves to placate them. He organized gatherings where he and the samurai could meet to discuss the future of Japan, attempting to bridge the gap between the two factions. But no matter how hard he tried, it was clear that the military's demands were becoming more insistent. We fought for this restoration. One of the samurai leaders, a man named Imai, said to Morinaga during a meeting in the capital, "We risked our lives to overthrow the shogunate. Now you would have us bow to the court as if nothing has changed." Morinaga's jaw tightened. "I understand your anger, Imai, but the emperor's vision for Japan is one of unity. The court must lead, but the samurai must have a place in the new government. We cannot allow the country to be torn apart again by internal strife. But the court does not understand The ways of the samurai Imai argued. They do not understand the reality of governing with the sword. The emperor may sit on the throne, but it is we who protect the empire. It is we who ensure stability. Morinaga's response was measured, though his frustration was palpable. And it is the emperor who gives the samurai their legitimacy. Without the court's authority, there is no unity, there is no Japan. We must work together, or all we fought for will be meaningless. But despite his best efforts to placate the samurai, the divide between the court and the military only deepened. The samurai grew bolder in their demands, seeking more power in the new government, while the court, wary of losing control, resisted these overtures. Morinaga was caught between the two, struggling to maintain peace while balancing the competing interests of both sides. As the tensions reached a boiling point, Morinaga began to feel the full weight of his responsibilities. He had helped restore the imperial family to power, but now that power was fragile. The samurai, essential to the survival of the new regime, were becoming increasingly restless, and the court's desire for absolute control threatened to undermine the fragile alliances that had been forged in the aftermath of the war. One night, as Morinaga sat in his chambers, staring out over the quiet streets of Kyoto, he reflected on the precariousness of his position. The military might of the samurai was indispensable, but their loyalty was far from guaranteed. The court, on the other hand, was the source of the imperial family's legitimacy. But their petty infighting and obsession with tradition had created a rift between them and the men who now held the real power. Morinaga had been trained to lead armies to win battles, but leading a nation was an entirely different matter. The balance of power between the imperial court and the samurai was as delicate as a thread. One wrong move could cause it to snap, sending Japan into chaos once again. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was his father, the emperor. Morinaga Go Daigo said softly, "You have done much for this empire, but I fear we are at a crossroads. The samurai grow restless, and the court is consumed with its own desires. How do we bridge this divide?" Morinaga looked at his father, his heart heavy. "I have tried, father, but the samurai will not be placated by promises. They want power, and they will not accept being subjugated by the court." Go Daigo nodded, his face etched with the wisdom of experience. "And yet the court must remain the center of authority. We cannot allow military rule to return." Morinaga sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the nation on his shoulders. "I will do whatever is necessary, father. But the balance between the court and the military cannot be maintained by force alone. We must find a way to unite them, if such a thing is even possible." The emperor placed a hand on Morinaga's shoulder. "You are the key, my son. Your strength, Your vision, perhaps only you can find a way forward. But Morinaga knew that the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. The restoration had been won with blood and sacrifice, but maintaining it would require more than military prowess. It would require diplomacy, compromise, and above all, wisdom. And as he stood at the crossroads of Japan's future, Morinaga understood that the greatest challenge was not the battlefield, but the battle for the soul of the nation. The halls of the Imperial Palace were once again filled with the bustling sounds of courtiers, scholars, and advisors, but beneath the surface a dangerous undercurrent of tension simmered. After the restoration of the imperial family in 1333, the court was meant to be the seat of power, the heart from which Japan's future would pulse. Yet the victory over the shogunate and the defeat of the Hojo clan had done little to quell the deep divisions within the very institution that should have been united behind Emperor Go-Daigo's leadership. Morinaga, now a trusted figure in the imperial court, had seen the cracks begin to form soon after the restoration. What had seemed like a triumph for the imperial family was rapidly becoming a battleground for power and influence. The court, once a symbol of unity under the emperor, had fractured into factions, each vying for control. These factions were composed of rival courtiers, military leaders, and old imperial supporters, each with their own vision of what Japan should become and how it should be ruled. The first and most prominent faction within the court was that of the conservative traditionalists who sought to restore the imperial family's old ways. They believed in the sacred and divine right of the emperor to rule Japan without interference. This faction, led by influential courtiers like Fujita no Takanori, advocated for the complete removal of military influence and the establishment of a purely imperial government that would focus on culture, art, and the restoration of the old courtly customs that had been suppressed during the reign of the shogunate. The military faction, on the other hand, led by figures such as Takeda, one of Morinaga's allies from the samurai, was more pragmatic. They argued that the samurai, whose loyalty had been crucial to the success of the rebellion, must continue to play a central role in governance. This faction feared that without the military's continued power, the imperial court would be unable to defend itself against internal or external threats. They pressed for greater representation in the governance of Japan, advocating for military leadership in key regions, a shift away from the purely court-based power structure. Between these two factions was the moderate group, a mixture of courtiers, advisors, and samurai, who sought a balance between the restoration of imperial authority and the maintenance of the samurai's influence. They did not want to return to the days of feudal dominance under the shogunate, but they also recognized that the samurai's military prowess could not be disregarded. They believed the imperial family could lead Japan, but only if the samurai were integrated into the new government structure as protectors of the realm, not as its overlords. Morinaga had always been a man of action, a military strategist who had helped lead the rebellion. But now, he found himself in the midst of a political storm, unsure of how to navigate the delicate balance between these competing factions. His father, Emperor Go-Daigo, was intent on restoring the grandeur of the imperial court, but his authority was being undermined by the infighting that had begun to consume the court's leadership. One morning, Morinaga was summoned to a private audience with the emperor. As he entered Go-Daigo's chambers, he saw the weight of the situation reflected in his father's weary face. Morinaga the emperor began his tone heavy with concern. "Have heard the whispers in the court. The factions grow more vocal. They threaten to tear apart the unity we fought for. We have restored the throne, but now I fear we may lose it in the halls of this very palace." Morinaga, who had long been used to the clarity of military strategy, found himself struggling with the complexity of this new political battlefield. "Father," he said carefully, "the court is divided, but it is not beyond repair. We must act swiftly before these factions grow too powerful. If we do not, they will undermine the very authority we've worked so hard to reclaim." The emperor nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "The traditionalists would have us rule from the palace, untouched by the realities of war. They do not understand the power the samurai wield, nor the dangers we face. They believe we can turn our back on the military completely, as though the shogunate's legacy could be wiped away with a single stroke of the brush." "And the military faction?" Morinaga asked. "They would strip us of our power, would they not? They think we should rule with swords at our sides, but we cannot allow military power to overshadow the throne." The emperor's eyes darkened. "The samurai played their part, and I am grateful for their support, but their loyalty cannot be taken for granted. If we do not control the samurai, they will control us." Morinaga nodded, his mind racing. His role was now clear. He had to navigate these treacherous waters. The samurai could not be alienated, but neither could they be allowed to dominate the imperial court. The loyalty of the samurai must be preserved, but it could not come at the expense of the emperor's sovereignty. Morinaga's growing importance in the court was evident as he became the emperor's closest advisor. He found himself mediating between the factions, trying to keep the peace while securing his father's authority. Morinaga knew that the key to survival lay in his ability to unite the court, or at least to make the factions coexist without tearing the empire apart. He began by strengthening his alliances with the military faction, which was crucial for ensuring the loyalty of the samurai. He understood that their strength was not just in their swords, but in their influence over the provinces. By forging strategic alliances with influential samurai families and military leaders, he ensured the stability of the imperial rule outside Kyoto. However, Morinaga was careful not to let the military become too powerful. He continued to remind them that while their swords were necessary to protect the empire, the emperor's authority must be respected. At the same time, Morinaga worked to appease the traditionalists, assuring them that the emperor's restoration would not erase the court's cultural heritage. He reminded them that the strength of the imperial family lay not only in military victories, but in their ability to unify the nation through wisdom and justice. He promised that the court would play a central role in the governance of Japan, but only with the understanding that military support was necessary for the nation's survival. But despite his efforts, the factions continued to vie for power, each maneuvering for a larger share of influence. It became clear that the court was no longer a single unified entity. It was a fractured institution held together by the fragile threads of Morinaga's diplomacy and his strategic vision. As time passed, Emperor Go-Daigo's patience began to wear thin. He had seen his dreams of a unified Japan slip through his fingers as the court fell into infighting. The emperor had long dreamed of a court ruled by imperial sovereignty, a place where the power of the samurai was secondary to the divine right of the emperor. But as the factions grew more entrenched, Go-Daigo realized that maintaining his vision of an absolute monarchy might not be feasible. One evening, he spoke to Morinaga in private. "My son, I am beginning to see that my vision of a restored imperial family may not come to pass as I imagined. Perhaps I was too hasty in thinking we could return to the old ways." Morinaga's heart sank. "Father, we cannot abandon the vision we fought for. The court may be divided, but we can still unite it. It will take time, but the samurai must learn to respect the emperor, and the courtiers must understand the military's role in ensuring Japan's security." Go-Daigo sighed. "I want to believe that, Morinaga, but it seems we are caught in a struggle that will not end so easily." The court's internal conflicts continued to mount, and Morinaga found himself in an increasingly difficult position. His role as the bridge between the factions placed him at the heart of Japan's political turmoil. While he had the loyalty of the samurai, the traditionalist courtiers grew more resentful of his influence. The struggle for power within the imperial court was far from over, and Morinaga realized that the restoration, though a victory, had merely begun to uncover the deeper wounds that would take years to heal. As Morinaga pondered his next move, he knew that the true challenge lay not in defeating an external enemy, but in uniting a fractured Japan, one torn between the power of the sword and the sanctity of the throne. The battle for Japan's soul was not over, and Morinaga was determined to ensure that the imperial family would emerge from the strife not just as rulers, but as the true unifiers of the nation. But with the factions continuing to plot and scheme, the path to peace would not be easily won. The imperial family's restoration in 1333 began to take shape. Prince Morinaga found himself caught between two powerful forces. One that wanted to see the imperial family return to its rightful place of leadership, and another that sought to preserve the power of the samurai, which had become entrenched during the years of shogunate rule. The victory over the Kamakura shogunate and the fall of the Hojo regents had been hard won, but Morinaga knew that the real battle was only just beginning. The samurai who had rallied to the imperial cause were not easily content with simply fighting to restore the throne. They also wanted their reward. The military faction, led by influential figures like Takeda and Imai, believed that the samurai should play a central role in the governance of Japan. The court faction, which had been largely sidelined during the shogunate's reign, was eager to reclaim the power and influence it had lost. These factions were deeply divided, and it was Morinaga's role to ensure that neither side dominated the newly restored imperial system. However, his efforts to balance power between the court and the samurai were met with intense opposition from both sides. After the shogunate's fall, the samurai were the de facto military force in Japan, and many felt that the samurai deserved a significant role in the new government. As a key military figure who had been instrumental in the defeat of the Hojo clan, Morinaga had the ear of many samurai leaders. He had once fought alongside them to restore the imperial family's power, and now he had to contend with their growing demands for greater political influence. One afternoon, as Morinaga met with Takeda and several samurai leaders in Kyoto, the tension was palpable. The samurai who had expected their loyalty and sacrifice to be rewarded with greater autonomy were becoming impatient with the slow pace of change. Prince Morinaga. Takeda began, his voice firm but respectful. We fought alongside the imperial family to restore Japan. The shogunate is gone, but the samurai's role in governance should not be forgotten. We are the protectors of Japan. Without us, this country would fall back into chaos. We should not merely be soldiers. We should be leaders, advisors, and governors. Morinaga knew this was coming. The samurai had risked everything to restore the emperor to the throne, and they wanted a stake in the governance of the nation. He had tried to reassure them that their role in the new Japan would be significant, but the reality was that their power had to be balanced with the authority of the imperial court. I understand your concerns. Takeda Morinaga replied, his tone measured. But the emperor's power must remain the central authority of Japan. The samurai are vital to the nation's security, but we cannot allow military power to overshadow the throne. The imperial court, though restored, must lead the country in a way that brings unity, not division. Takeda's eyes narrowed, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. Unity, you think the court, which has been out of touch with the realities of war and governance, can lead us? We have seen the Hojo regents fall, but the samurai were the ones who fought for that victory. We cannot be sidelined now. Morinaga could feel the weight of the conversation bearing down on him. He had worked tirelessly to restore the emperor to power, but the samurai's demand for influence in the government was growing stronger. If he didn't act carefully, the military might soon overshadow the imperial court, and that could mean the end of the delicate balance he was trying to maintain. Meanwhile, in the imperial court, the traditionalists were also making their voices heard. The courtiers, eager to regain their former status, resented the growing influence of the samurai and viewed their rise as a threat to the ancient authority of the imperial family. These factions, who had spent years serving the emperor during times of peace, believed that the court should lead without military interference. They viewed the samurai as a necessary evil during the war, but now that the shogunate had been overthrown, they believed it was time for the court to take back full control of Japan. One evening, in a meeting with several senior courtiers, Morinaga listened as Fujita no Takanori, a powerful courtier and leader of the conservative faction, spoke. Prince Morinaga Takanori said, his voice dripping with condescension, "You must understand that the imperial family is not like the samurai. We represent the spiritual and cultural heart of Japan. The emperor is a divine figure, not a mere military leader. The samurai may have fought for us, but the court is the rightful ruler of Japan. We cannot allow the military to dictate our future." Morinaga clenched his fists, trying to maintain his composure. He understood the significance of the court's spiritual role, but he also knew that without the military's backing, the imperial family would be defenseless. The samurai were essential to maintaining peace and order. Yet the court could not give up its power without risking the collapse of the imperial family's authority. I understand your concerns, Takanori Morinaga said slowly, but the samurai's loyalty has been essential to restoring the emperor's power. Their role cannot be dismissed. We must find a way to incorporate their strength into the government without undermining the emperor's authority. Takanori's gaze hardened. And what of the emperor's authority when it is influenced by sword and blood? The court must lead in peace, not in the shadow of military rule. We cannot allow the samurai to dictate the emperor's actions. Morinaga knew that the court's opposition was not just ideological, it was deeply personal. For years, the courtiers had lived in the shadow of the shogunate, waiting for the return of imperial rule. Now that it was within their grasp, they could not bear the thought of the samurai taking a larger role in governance. Yet Morinaga also knew that the samurai were indispensable. Without their strength, the restoration would be fragile. Caught between these two opposing factions, Morinaga's desire to strengthen imperial authority began to feel like a tightrope walk. The samurai, whose loyalty had won the battle, were demanding more power, but their rise to prominence threatened the balance of power within the court. On the other hand, the courtiers, eager to reclaim their former influence, refused to accept the samurai's growing dominance. The challenge Morinaga faced was not simply one of military strategy, it was one of governance. He had helped win the war, but now he had to win the peace. The future of Japan depended on his ability to unite the court and the military to create a system where the emperor's power was not diluted by either faction. It was a monumental task, one that would require more than just force. It would require diplomacy, patience, and careful negotiation. As Morinaga sat in his chambers one night, contemplating the path ahead, he realized that the most difficult battle was not on the field. It was in the halls of the imperial palace. The factions within the court were more dangerous than any army. He would need to find a way to bridge the gap between the samurai and the court to convince both sides that the strength of the imperial family lay in unity, not division. But the road ahead was uncertain. The tension between the court and the samurai would not be easily resolved, and Morinaga could feel the pressure mounting. Every decision he made would either strengthen the imperial family or tear it apart. In that moment, he knew that Japan's future hung in the balance, and it was his responsibility to ensure that the sword and the court could coexist, not as rivals, but as partners in the restoration of a unified Japan. The weight of victory had hardly settled on the shoulders of the imperial family before the deep fissures within the court began to show themselves. Morinaga, having played a key role in the restoration of the emperor and the defeat of the Hojo clan, found himself at the heart of a growing political storm. His actions, driven by a desire to strengthen the imperial authority, had made him an enemy to many within the court, who saw his growing influence as a threat to their own ambitions. The tension between the military factions and the traditional court factions had not gone unnoticed, and Morinaga's unwavering loyalty to his father, Emperor Go-Daigo, had made him a symbol of the military's increasing dominance in the new government. But the very forces that had helped secure the emperor's return to power now turned against him. Morinaga had always been a man of action, a warrior who had spent his life leading men into battle. But now, in the imperial court, his actions were scrutinized under the harsh light of politics. As the emperor's most trusted son, Morinaga sought to maintain the delicate balance of power between the military and the court. But his efforts had only deepened the divisions between the two factions. His closest allies, including the samurai leaders who had fought alongside him, began to feel the strain of their own ambitions. Among them was Ashikaga Takauji, once a loyal ally of the imperial family, but one who had grown increasingly dissatisfied with the court's refusal to grant the samurai more direct control over Japan. Takauji had been a key figure in the rebellion, his military prowess and leadership crucial to the success of the imperial forces, but he was no longer content with simply fighting on the emperor's behalf. Takauji sought power, and as the months wore on, it became clear that he was positioning himself to be more than just a military leader. He wanted to be the one who led Japan. Takauji's growing ambition was matched by his growing distrust of Morinaga. The relationship between the two men, once built on mutual respect and shared victory, began to sour. Morinaga had always viewed Takauji as a necessary ally, but Takauji, now emboldened by his military success, was increasingly willing to challenge the very authority of the imperial court. His growing frustration with the court's refusal to grant him greater power mirrored the discontent of many samurai leaders who felt that their sacrifices during the rebellion had not been adequately rewarded. As the political struggle within the court intensified, Takauji began to see Morinaga as a threat to his own ambitions. Morinaga's influence in the imperial court had become a symbol of the court's strength, and Takauji, ever the military pragmatist, began to believe that the imperial family's restoration was not enough. If Japan was to be governed by the samurai, the emperor's power would need to be redefined or eliminated altogether. The first signs of betrayal came quietly. Takauji, once an ally, now moved in the shadows, gathering support from those samurai who believed that the military should wield true power in Japan. Morinaga's attempts to maintain control of the court, his insistence that the samurai should remain loyal to the emperor's sovereignty, clashed with Takauji's desire to seize control for himself. The conflict between the two men had become inevitable, and Takauji's ambitions could no longer be ignored. Morinaga had always known that political alliances could be fragile, but the betrayal came with a swiftness that shocked him. One evening in 1335, after a particularly tense council meeting in the Imperial Palace, Morinaga was summoned to a private audience with his father. As he entered the emperor's chambers, he could sense that something had changed. The air was thick with uncertainty. Father Morinaga began, "We cannot allow the samurai to control the court. Takauji grows restless, and if we do not act quickly, we risk losing all the ground we've gained." Go-Daigo, always composed, looked at his son with a heavy heart. "Morinaga, I fear the worst. Takauji has become too powerful. His ambitions have begun to overtake his loyalty. The samurai are no longer simply warriors. They are men with political power, and they will no longer follow the imperial family's lead unless we give them what they want. I will not let him take control," Father Morinaga said fiercely. "The emperor's authority cannot be compromised." But Go-Daigo's gaze was somber. "Morinaga, I do not want war between us. I want peace, but I fear that peace may no longer be possible." It was in that moment that Morinaga realized the full extent of his predicament. Takauji's ambitions were not just personal. They were part of a larger shift in Japan's political landscape. The samurai were not content to be the emperor's enforcers anymore. They sought to be rulers in their own right. Later that night, Morinaga's worst fears came to fruition. Takauji, seeing Morinaga as a threat to his own growing power, had made his move. He had already secured the loyalty of key samurai generals, and with their support, he launched a sudden and brutal betrayal. Morinaga, unaware of the looming danger, was captured by Takauji's forces in a swift surprise raid. The news of Morinaga's capture spread quickly through Kyoto, and the court was thrown into chaos. The emperor, devastated by the loss of his son and heir, could do little to stop Takauji's rise. The military faction under Takauji's leadership had gained too much ground, and Morinaga, once the pillar of imperial authority, was now a prisoner. Morinaga was taken to Takauji's stronghold, bound and helpless. The once proud prince, who had led armies and secured the emperor's return to the throne, now faced the bitter reality of political betrayal. His imprisonment was not merely symbolic. It was the end of an era. Takauji's forces, now in control of Kyoto, began to reshape Japan's future according to their own vision. Morinaga's imprisonment was a tragic turn of fate. Once the symbol of the imperial family's resurgence, he was now relegated to a prison cell held captive by the very forces he had helped rise to prominence. Takauji, though once a loyal ally, had turned against him in the pursuit of power. The samurai, once united under the banner of the emperor, were now split, and Morinaga's capture was a painful reminder of the fragility of political alliances. Morinaga's days in captivity were marked by deep reflection. The betrayal by Takauji stung, but it also served as a harsh lesson in the dangerous interplay between power and loyalty. He had trusted the very men who had once stood beside him, only to have them turn their swords against him when their ambitions grew too great. As the weeks turned into months, Morinaga's health began to deteriorate. He had once been a warrior, a leader, but now he was a prisoner in a game of politics he could no longer control. His imprisonment and the tragic circumstances leading to his fall were a sobering reminder of the fragility of power. Even after restoring the emperor to the throne, the imperial family had not secured a lasting peace. Instead, it had opened the door for further conflict that would eventually give rise to the Ashikaga shogunate led by Takauji. Though his body weakened in captivity, Morinaga's spirit remained unbroken. He knew that the fight for Japan's soul was far from over, and even in the darkness of his prison, he held on to the hope that one day the true legacy of the imperial family would be restored. In the end, Morinaga's betrayal marked not just the fall of one man, but the beginning of a new era. One where the samurai would take center stage and the imperial family would once again find itself overshadowed by the military forces it had helped to create. The battle for Japan's future, it seemed, was far from finished. The years of Morinaga's imprisonment passed slowly, marked by the silent passage of time, the cold stone walls, and the constant weight of his fall from grace. Once the rising star of the imperial family, the man who had led armies to victory and secured the throne for his father Morinaga, now languished in a prison cell, his fate sealed by the very forces he had helped empower. It was the year 1348, when Morinaga's life, filled with such promise and potential, came to a tragic and ignoble end. While details surrounding his death remain clouded in uncertainty, the circumstances point to either starvation or poisoning, both slow, agonizing methods of execution, marking a bitter end for a man who had once held the future of Japan in his hands. Morinaga's imprisonment under Ashikaga, Takauji, the leader of the military faction who had betrayed him and taken control of the imperial court, was never meant to be anything less than a political statement. Takauji had grown more powerful with each passing year, his rise ultimately leading to the establishment of the Ashikaga shogunate in 1338. With this new military regime came the shift in power that Morinaga had fought so hard to prevent. The samurai, whom he had once united with the imperial cause, were now the true rulers of Japan. Morinaga, once the trusted heir to the throne, now sat in a dark, cold cell, his once vibrant life reduced to mere survival. The circumstances of his capture were brutal, but it was the slow death in captivity that marked the cruelest betrayal of all. His enemies, now firmly entrenched in power, saw no value in a man who had once threatened their rule, and so Morinaga's prolonged suffering was a symbol of their complete control. He spent his days in isolation, denied both the comforts of courtly life and the hope of release. The food was scarce, the water foul, and the air thick with decay. Morinaga's health deteriorated rapidly. At times, he was unable to lift his head, or even speak, a mere shadow of the proud warrior who had led armies in the name of the emperor. It was not just his body that wasted away, but the hope that he had once carried for the imperial family's future, as that very future slipped further from his grasp. There are accounts that Morinaga was eventually poisoned, an act that some believe was the final blow orchestrated by Takauji's supporters to ensure his death. Others claim that he died of starvation, his body too weak from years of neglect to survive. Either way, Morinaga's death was a slow, painful end for a man whose legacy had once seemed destined to shape the future of Japan. Morinaga's death, though physically tragic, symbolized the collapse of the very authority he had fought to restore. The emperor, once again in possession of the throne, found himself a powerless figurehead in a country now controlled by the samurai. With Morinaga gone, any remaining hope for a strong imperial leadership evaporated. The Ashikaga shogunate, founded by Takauji, began to assert its dominance across Japan, firmly establishing the samurai as the true rulers. In the years following Morinaga's death, the imperial family would continue to lose its grip on power. Though the emperor remained on the throne, his authority was undermined by the military class, which had now solidified its role as the true governing force in Japan. The shogunate, which had been created to protect the imperial family, had ultimately supplanted it with the Ashikaga family at the helm. The irony of Morinaga's demise was not lost on those who had supported him. The very forces he had helped to empower the samurai had become the agents of his destruction. His death marked the tragic conclusion of his lifelong struggle to balance the power of the sword with the authority of the imperial court. What he had hoped would be a restoration of imperial sovereignty had instead paved the way for the rise of military rule, a rule that in the end was as oppressive as that of the Hojo regents. Morinaga's death was not just a personal tragedy. It was the final, heartbreaking chapter in the collapse of the imperial family's power. The samurai, once their greatest allies, had become their greatest rivals, and the court had been unable to reclaim the power it had lost. Morinaga had spent his life fighting to protect the emperor's sovereignty, but in the end, it was the samurai who would rule Japan. He had been the symbol of hope for a restored Japan where the imperial family would again hold sway over the nation. His military brilliance, his diplomatic acumen, and his unwavering loyalty to the throne had earned him the admiration of many. But his death served as a reminder of the harsh realities of Japanese politics where loyalty was fleeting. Alliances were fragile and power was seized, not inherited. Morinaga's life and death also serve as a reflection of the broader tensions that defined Japan's transition from imperial rule to military rule. The restoration of the imperial throne in 1333, while momentous, had been a temporary victory. The samurai, empowered by the very efforts of the imperial family to restore their rule, had ultimately taken control. Morinaga's death was a poignant symbol of this shift, the end of the imperial family's dominance, and the rise of the Ashikaga shogunate, which would govern Japan for the next 2.5 centuries. Though Morinaga died in captivity, his legacy did not die with him. His vision for a united Japan, ruled by the emperor but protected by the samurai, was a fleeting dream that would never come to fruition. However, his sacrifices and his commitment to the imperial cause were not forgotten. He had fought for the future of his family and his country, and his death, though tragic, marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. The Ashikaga shogunate, established in the wake of Morinaga's death, would go on to rule Japan for generations, but the memory of the imperial family's struggle to reclaim their throne would live on in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. Morinaga, though betrayed by the very forces he had helped create, remained a symbol of loyalty and sacrifice, qualities that would never be forgotten, even as Japan entered a new age of military rule. In the years that followed, the imperial family would continue to lose its grip on Japan's power. Morinaga's death marked not only the loss of a great warrior, but also the symbolic end of the last vestiges of imperial authority. His story, filled with valor, tragedy, and betrayal, would be remembered by those who understood the true cost of ambition and the fragility of power. The rise of the Ashikaga shogunate, though an era of stability for Japan, was forever marked by the bloodshed of those who had fought for a different future, a future that in the end slipped through the fingers of the imperial family, forever changed by the forces they had unleashed. The name Morinaga may not echo through the halls of history with the same reverence as some of Japan's other legendary figures, but his legacy, woven deeply into the fabric of the nation's tumultuous feudal past remains that of an enduring hero. Morinaga's life was marked by ambition, loyalty, and ultimately betrayal, a tragic figure caught in the shifting tides of power between the imperial family and the rising military class of samurai. Yet despite the tragic end he met in captivity, his story symbolizes the larger battle for Japan's soul during a time when the ideals of imperial authority collided head-on with the harsh realities of military power. Morinaga's legacy is multifaceted. To some, he was the heroic son of an emperor who, like his father, Go-Daigo, sought to restore the imperial family to its rightful place atop the political hierarchy. To others, he was a symbol of lost potential, a man who, despite his courage and vision, was ultimately unable to overcome the forces of military power that were reshaping Japan. Yet to those who understood the complexity of his struggle, Morinaga was much more than a political pawn or a tragic figure. He was a man who fought often against impossible odds for an ideal of Japan that had been lost in the chaos of the feudal age. The restoration of the imperial family in 1333 was not simply about the return of the emperor to the throne. It was about the restoration of a vision for Japan, a vision that Morinaga held dearly. The imperial family had once been the central authority in Japan, the symbol of unity and cultural identity. But over the centuries, the power of the emperors had dwindled as military regimes like the Kamakura shogunate rose to prominence, stripping the imperial family of their political control. Morinaga's fight was not only for the throne itself, but for a Japan where the emperor reigned supreme once again, and the military, though necessary for protection, would fall in line with the imperial authority. Morinaga's commitment to his father's vision, though ultimately thwarted by internal divisions and the rising power of the samurai, was noble. In his eyes, the emperor was not merely a figurehead, but a beacon of hope for the entire nation. He believed that Japan's strength lay in the unity of its people under the leadership of the emperor, with the samurai serving as the protectors of the realm, not as its rulers. Morinaga's role in the rebellion against the shogunate was crucial. He was the strategist, the military leader who organized and led the forces that defeated the Hojo regents. Without his efforts, the restoration would have been unlikely. His battle to unite the imperial court and the samurai was a testament to his belief in the possibility of a Japan where both factions could coexist. However, Morinaga's tragic death in captivity highlighted the ultimate fragility of this ideal. His sacrifice, whether through starvation or poisoning, underscored the tragic reality of his life that he fought for a vision that was never fully realized. Despite his downfall, Morinaga remained a hero in the eyes of many who supported the restoration. To the common people who had suffered under the shogunate's rule, Morinaga symbolized the hope of a Japan where the emperor, not military rulers, would guide the nation. He was not just a military commander. He was a symbol of the hope that Japan could be restored to its former glory, where the imperial family reigned not as a mere title, but as a legitimate, respected authority. Even in death, Morinaga's place in history remained one of symbolic importance. His story became one of the defining narratives of the period of a prince who fought valiantly for the ideals of imperial sovereignty only to be betrayed by the very men he had helped rise to power. His death, while tragic, became a rallying cry for those who continued to believe in the rightful authority of the imperial family, despite the rise of the Ashikaga shogunate. It was not just the samurai who mourned Morinaga's loss. Many in the court who had supported the restoration saw him as a hero who had given everything for the emperor. They admired his courage, his willingness to fight and sacrifice for the ideals of a unified Japan, even when it became clear that those ideals were slipping away. His memory lived on as a reminder of the imperial family's struggle to regain its place at the center of Japanese power. Morinaga's life, however, is defined by its tragic arc. He began as a promising young prince, full of ambition and hope for the future of Japan. His rise to power was swift, and his role in the imperial family's restoration cemented his place as a central figure in Japanese history. Yet his downfall, his betrayal by Takauji, and his eventual death in captivity serve as a stark reminder of the volatility of power in Japan's feudal age. The betrayal of Morinaga by Ashikaga Takauji was one of the most devastating events in his life. Takauji, once a loyal ally, had become disillusioned with the court and increasingly dissatisfied with his own position. His ambitions grew, and as he gathered power, he turned against the man who had once been his commander-in-arms. In Morinaga, Takauji saw not just a rival, but a symbol of the court's authority, and his betrayal sealed Morinaga's fate. Takauji's rise to power, which led to the establishment of the Ashikaga shogunate, marked the beginning of a new era in Japan, one where the samurai, and not the emperor, would hold the reins of power. Morinaga's tragic death was the final chapter in a life full of sacrifice. His health had deteriorated under the harsh conditions of imprisonment, and whether it was poisoning or the slow effects of starvation, his demise symbolized the end of an era for the imperial family. It was a cruel irony that the very man who had fought so hard to restore the emperor's authority would die alone, imprisoned by the very forces he had fought to keep in check. In the broader context of Japan's feudal history, Morinaga's legacy represents a moment of profound transition. His efforts to restore imperial power were not the beginning or the end of Japan's struggles between the court and the military. The Ashikaga shogunate, which rose to power in the wake of Morinaga's death, would rule Japan for more than 2 centuries, effectively relegating the imperial family to a ceremonial role. The rise of military rule marked the beginning of the Age of the Samurai and the end of the emperor's absolute power. However, Morinaga's life was not in vain. His struggle exemplified the inherent tension in Japan's political system, where the ideals of the emperor clashed with the military realities of the samurai. His sacrifice became part of the larger story of Japan's feudal history, a history marked by cycles of conflict, shifting allegiances, and the ever-present battle between political power and military might. Morinaga's death, though tragic, symbolized the cost of ambition, loyalty, and power in a fractured Japan. His memory lived on in the hearts of those who remembered the young prince who had fought so passionately for a vision of a united Japan, where the emperor's authority would reign supreme. While that vision never fully came to pass, Morinaga's heroism, his unwavering commitment to the imperial cause, and the tragedy of his untimely death continue to echo through the annals of Japan's history, reminding us of the cost of power, the fragility of authority, and the enduring struggle for sovereignty. Prince Morinaga's life and tragic death stand as poignant markers in Japan's tumultuous journey through feudal conflict. His story, though overshadowed by the rise of the Ashikaga shogunate, remains a testament to the complexity of power, loyalty, and sacrifice that defined medieval Japan. In his quest to restore the imperial family's sovereignty and reclaim a vision of a unified Japan, Morinaga embodied the idealism and determination that often drove historical figures to their tragic ends. His journey, marked by heroism, betrayal, and eventual death in captivity, captures the essence of Japan's fractured political landscape during the 14th century, a time when the very nature of authority and governance was being reshaped. Morinaga's struggles, both as a warrior and as a political figure, reflect the larger ongoing battle for dominance between the imperial family and the military class, the samurai. His efforts to strengthen the emperor's position and balance the power of the samurai with courtly authority highlight the deeper tension at the heart of Japan's feudal system. The shifting dynamics between these two powerful factions, military rule versus imperial sovereignty, created a political volatility that would shape Japan for centuries to come. Morinaga's efforts were part of a broader narrative of Japan's feudal conflicts, where loyalty and power were constantly in flux. His betrayal by Ashikaga Takauji, once his ally and his subsequent imprisonment symbolize the fragility of political alliances and the often heartbreaking cost of ambition in a world dominated by martial values. Yet, it is this very struggle that underscores the complexity of medieval Japan's history, where ideals of justice and loyalty collided with the harsh realities of power struggles. His life is a reflection of the deep and often painful realities of governance in feudal Japan. The samurai, who had once fought for the imperial family's restoration, ultimately turned against the very system they had helped create. Morinaga's death marks the tragic end of an era, but also the beginning of a new chapter in Japan's history. The rise of military dominance under the Ashikaga shogunate and the eventual sidelining of the imperial family's authority for centuries. Prince Morinaga's life and death stand as a testament to the quiet heroism and sacrifice that often go unnoticed in the grand sweep of history. His vision for a unified Japan under the divine leadership of the emperor was ultimately unfulfilled, yet it was a vision driven by loyalty to his father, justice for the people, and a deep commitment to restoring the imperial family's rightful authority. His story is one of tragic loss, yet it remains inspiring, offering a profound lesson on the cost of power and the value of principle in a world rife with political intrigue and betrayal. Though his name may not be as widely remembered as other great figures of Japan's feudal past, Morinaga's story continues to resonate. In the face of overwhelming odds, he chose to stand for an ideal, a Japan, where the emperor's power would reign supreme, where the samurai served as protectors, not rulers. His sacrifice, as painful as it was, speaks to the timeless themes of loyalty, honor, and the personal costs of fighting for a greater good. Morinaga's life serves as a reminder that true heroism often comes not from a final victory, but from the courage to fight for what one believes in, even when the outcome is uncertain. His death, though tragic, is part of the larger tapestry of Japan's feudal history, and his legacy in many ways lives on in the hearts of those who continue to value the ideals of justice, honor, and sacrifice that he embodied. In the pages of history, Morinaga's name may not always stand at the forefront, but his contributions, his heroism, and the tragic nature of his demise continue to inspire admiration and respect. His story is a poignant reminder that sometimes the true weight of one's impact on history is not measured by the victories achieved, but by the sacrifices made in the pursuit of an ideal.